Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was halfway through a 12-hour Saturday shift, coasting along Constitution Avenue in a black Lincoln built for quiet, when the phone on my dash buzzed with a 3-word text from dispatch. Dirksen, garage, now. No itinerary attachment, no badge number to verify, no prefatory please. It was the kind of clipped message that shows up when a scheduler's been told to stop talking and move people. A beat later, a second text followed. You are primary, which meant my backup car would shadow me at a distance. 2 cars for a U.S. senator wasn't unheard of, but it usually came with a longer lead. I pulled into the service lane at 1st Street NE, slid my chauffeur cap off, and tapped the trunk release. The Lincoln was a long wheelbase livery model, heavy doors that shut like a bank vault, partitioned glass I never used unless asked, executive rear climate control, jump seats folded clean. There was a first aid kit under my seat, spare water bottles stacked in the right rear door pocket, and a Unannounced scanner clipped under the dash to give me a sense of where traffic was braking. I kept it low and quick, a heartbeat behind the radio. The Capitol complex ahead looked like a time-lapse of a storm front. MPD cruisers rolled toward the hill, blue lights steady, not flashing bursts, but a continuous glow that meant perimeter duty. U.S. Capitol Police SUVs slipstreamed in the other lane, and I watched one blow a yellow on Constitution, only to slow instead of accelerate. That was the first odd thing, a rush that decelerated into caution near every intersection, like they were bracing for something they couldn't name on the air. My phone vibrated again. Unknown number. I tapped headset. Rourke, I said. Miles, Senator David Harlan. You're picking me up from Dirksen. C Street entrance. Pull down into the lower bay. We won't stroll a hallway like tourists today. The voice was even, a little dry, like a speech pitched to a small-town gymnasium. You can tell a public servant by their mouthfeel of the word bay. Yes, sir. And Miles. He paused, as if selecting a card from a deck out of view. We are not going to the residence, not today. Understood. I eased around the block and dropped into the Dirksen loading zone, where a pair of USCP officers stood with their hands on their radios, watching 2 guys in suits walk too fast. One officer glanced at my plates and my company placard. His expression said, "Good, this is the one, or maybe it's the one we have." He waved me through the security swing gate. The scanner under my dash clicked to a local control channel and then to static. Somebody had stepped on their transmit pedal and was trying to remember what to say. The lower bay smells like dry cement, old tires, and bad coffee. Senators don't stand around down there, staffers do, layered in lanyards and purpose. When the elevator doors slid open, it was the senator first, tall, late 50s. That Capitol gym leanness. A white shirt rolled to the forearms, tie crooked, and a navy jacket folded over one arm. He carried a manila folder in that tucked way people do when they don't trust their pockets. His chief of staff, Priya Shah, kept tight to his shoulder, her eyes taking in angles, not people, like she was mapping edges. Behind them, a Capitol Police sergeant paced, radio clipped to a vest carrier. The senator's left hand had a square of gauze taped over the heel of the palm. It looked like a fresh paper cut, straight, too clean to be anything else, but the gauze was already the color of tea. I stepped out and opened his door. Senator Harlan, Miles Rourke. He nodded and slid in. Priya slid in after, closing the door as if she were afraid air could learn your secrets. The USCP sergeant leaned toward me, arm braced on the B-pillar. Straight out, take the ramp, stay on C Street. We've got ad hoc at checkpoints, they're not on ways. Keep your windows up. If you see a crowd, you do not honk." "Copy." "Keep your radio off," he added, glancing at my scanner. "Plain language only, if you have to talk to anyone." "Understood?" I pulled us out, tires hissing over paint. "Air's cold and back?" I asked, killing the music and opening the vents. "Fine," the senator said. The scanner stayed quiet. Outside, C Street ran between the shell of government and the airless corridors below. The hill that day felt like a set you'd step off and find plywood bracing the marble. There were cones where cones never are, and one MPD cruiser parked half a car's length off the curb like its driver couldn't bring himself to commit to any position. "You want the residence, sir?" my mouth asked, while my mind tried to place the gauze. "No." He looked at the partition glass as if I weren't there. "Private location, Foggy Bottom." Priya leaned forward. "We'll enter via Virginia Avenue. If the river is restricted, we take K Street under Washington Circle and cut through the underground." "The underground?" I said. "Civil defense era. I'll show you the way. Just keep moving." The car's cabin had that faint new scar smell from detailer leather conditioner, and beneath it, metallic, not much. Not enough to alarm passengers. Enough to press the middle of your tongue like a battery. I took Constitution West, past the fountains of the Capitol reflecting pool, past tourists who had that walk of people who are about to admit to each other they made a mistake coming today. Everyone looked like they were choosing to be calm. The first unannounced checkpoint sat at the 3rd Street NW, just before the turn to Pennsylvania Avenue. 2 USCP with long guns held low, the barrels never pointing at anything but never not ready. Beyond them, a Metrobus idled, empty, hazard lights winking like a heartbeat. An officer in a baseball cap approached my window. He had the posture of someone who'd been awake for 20 hours. "Where are you headed?" "Foggy Bottom," I said. "Transporting Senator Harlan." The officer leaned to look into back, saw the senator, nodded once. "E Street Expressway is being held. Rock Creek may be closing. Stay off 17th. You'll want to take Constitution to 23rd, swing north, then cut under Washington Circle. We got disturbances down by the mall." He didn't say protest or riot or attack. He said disturbances, the word that lets a report breathe while it learns what it's about. Understood. I rolled forward. The senator's phone buzzed constantly and he ignored it until he didn't, jabbing the screen with his thumb, listening without moving much. "They know," he said to Priya. "They're closing old EOB. Secret Service is pulling down E Street. There's chatter about department evacuations, and they're saying they have people behaving in ways that are—" He looked at the gauze and ran his thumb against the tape. Unexpected. The scanner spat a burst of encryption. Then a patch channel worked for a heartbeat and died. Priya leaned forward again. "Miles, if you see anyone in the roadway who seems—" She ran out of a word polite enough. "Distracted, you avoid, you don't engage. Do you have a medical kit?" "Under my seat," I said. "Gloves? Nitrile." "Good." I've driven everyone from a retirement fundraiser's loudest donor to an astronaut who didn't like being driven at all. And the trick is the same. Build a corridor of normal for them and keep them inside it as long as you can. The road stitches the corridor together. The AC is a porch at dusk. The bottles of water are a ritual in a world that has none. I checked mirrors and signaled for the right lane, and a taxi that would usually fight me eased off, the driver staring at my rear passenger window like he was looking for permission to leave. On 23rd, the northbound lanes moved at a measured pace, as if someone had laid down a metronome nobody wanted to argue with. Down the slope to the river, the Rock Creek and Potomac Parkway glinted with brake lights, and over it a helicopter made a slow right-in over the mall. The scanner burped what sounded like a patch to a Federal Mutual Aid channel and then cut again. The silence between transmissions felt like the moment before a dropped glass hits a tile floor. Washington Circle stood like a coin pressed into the city. I aimed the Lincoln into the K Street underpass, the thin concrete throat that lets you slide under the circle and pop out where the street resumes its duty. Priya reached between the seats and tapped the navigation screen once, a flick on the glass that redirected nothing and everything. "Stay left after the tunnel," she said. "There's a service ramp. It looks like a delivery bay. It used to be part of an old streetcar station. We're going to cut through." She said it like people talk when they choose an alley they swear is safe because the daylight is good. We slid under the circle, the Lincoln's interior lights briefly reflecting in the tiled tunnel walls like we were inside a camera lens. At the far side, I hugged left. The service ramp looked exactly like what city planners want you to look past. A loading dock mouth beneath a mid-century office building, 3 yellow bollards nicked by trucks, a steel roll-up door, a red light dead over a keypad that might have been state-of-the-art when cassette Walkmans were. Priya's hand came up again. "Wait, not yet." A voice from the back seat. "Do not stop on the mouth," the senator said. "Either go in or go on. Don't perch." He said perch like a word you use to shame a driver at a barkeep debate on tactical driving. The red light above the roll-up door clicked green. I eased us into the bay and the door rattled down behind us, the sound of a chain on a flagpole in a storm. "You've been here," I said. "My friend has," the senator said. Cold War relic turned private construction. After 9/11, people with money got interested in square footage they couldn't be seen paying for. This space, let's just say contractors who did basements, got callbacks. And it belongs to no one on paper, that's the point. Priya slid out her side with the cautious speed of someone who knows if something surprises you from the shadows, your adrenaline will convince you to step backward into traffic. She crossed to a narrow side door painted the kind of beige that hides flaws. Numbers on a keypad beeped without complaint. I shut the engine, and for a second the only noise was the cooling click of the Lincoln and the background hum that every underground space has, the chorus of wires and air. Miles. The senator's voice had changed a degree, the way men change their tone when they need to ask for an extra favor on top of all the ones baked into your work. I cut my hand. Paper edge, folder. Not a story, just a fact. I want you to know that because you will notice things and your head will write its own. I know what you will ask next. No, I did not touch anyone after, and I washed it. There's a sink in the skiff. "Okay," I said. "We'll keep it clean back here." He nodded. The heaviest lies are often the ones that are half true. I didn't know whether he was lying or if I'd learned too much in this job about people who thought they weren't. I stepped around the back of the Lincoln to open the trunk, thinking of the go bag with a flashlight and a folded map I liked better than GPS. When I popped it, the trunk lid lifted a fraction, and then the smell hit. Stale sweat, something metallic and sour, and the paper and ink tang of a printer room. I knew immediately what I was smelling. Not the car, not my kit. I was smelling someone else's day in the way fear changes the skin. A whisper from the darkness of folded luggage. "Don't," and a hand moved between suit carrier and spare blanket, fingers chalky with dust. I took a long step back and lifted my palms the way you do for nervous dogs and young men on their worst day. "You're not a duffel," I said softly. A staffer unfolded from the right side of the trunk, the place where the tub narrows near the wheel well. Eyes glossy, hair matted against his head as if he'd napped badly. He wore a Hill intern's uniform. Navy blazer too big through the shoulders, tie knotted wrong, brown shoes that wanted to be older. He blinked at the light of the loading bay like he expected it to be sun, then focused on me. "I just needed to They told us not to get in cars. They told us not to be in hallways. I didn't want to be in a hallway. He coughed once into his elbow, a dry bark like a handsaw. "What's your name?" "JJ," he said. "Jacob, He pressed his palm to his temple, thumb rubbing a crescent, like he was trying to turn down feedback from a headset. "They said there were people in the house tunnels moving like they were asleep. A police officer told us to go back to our offices and wait. We didn't want to be in the offices. We went to the garage. I saw your license plate on a confirmation screen. Primary. I thought this was the safe one." "It is," I lied, and caught Priya's expression reflected in the roll-up door's stainless steel. Not shock, not anger. Calculation. "Get him in the side room," she said without raising her voice. "Miles, glove up." She tapped a steel door off the loading bay that I'd assumed was a janitor closet. Inside it was a small anteroom. White walls, poured floor, a bench built for waiting out storms. She popped open a wall cabinet and pulled out nitrile gloves and a small bottle of chlorhexidine. Everything smelled medical and lemon clean. She'd prepared this. "JJ," she said, "sit." I'm fine," he said. He was not, and his voice knew it. The senator stood in the doorway watching. The gauze on his hand had deepened in shade. He tucked the hand into his jacket like a nervous man hides a single bad card. "Were you near anyone who was hurt?" I asked, tugging on gloves. He looked at me like he was willing to trade truth for permission. "Someone fell in the corridor near the visitor center. She got up wrong and—" He closed his eyes. "She didn't stop. The officer put her behind a door, then he locked it. We all pretended that was fine." Priya's eyes flicked to the senator and back. "We're moving him with us," she said. "But if he gets dizzy or tells us the lights are too bright, we mask him and we isolate." "You're assuming we're going further," I said. She looked at me like I'd asked whether the sun intended to set. "We're not perching in a loading dock, Miles." We got JJ into the car, back jump seat down so he could recline. A bottle of water into his hand and a surgical mask from the anteroom over his face. He clutched the bottle, but didn't raise it to his mouth, as if he'd forgotten what to do with it. The senator watched him with an expression I'd seen on men looking at thunderstorms from porches. "We're not going to a hospital, Senator," Priya said. It sounded like an answer to a question he hadn't asked out loud. "No," he said, "we are not. The secret of any city is that there are more corridors than you can imagine, and fewer that you are allowed to use." Priya led us through 2 more doors and a gentle decline. No signage, concrete that buckled a little at the seams, the light quality changing from office beige to industrial blue-white, and then to the too warm glow of old fixtures. We moved from private construction into what felt older, a passage big enough to fit a small truck, tiled walls scarred by deliveries that were not recorded on invoices. Even the air changed. Above ground air is weather, underground air is intention. It pushes where somebody decided it should. I drove with a feather foot, the tires whispering against the floor. Twice we passed cross corridors that had been bricked up decades ago, the outlines of archways trapped under block and paint. Priya watched each junction like a conductor watching sidings. The senator stared forward, knuckles pale around the folder. JJ breathed through the mask, slow, counting, like a runner coaxing himself up an invisible hill. Ahead, the passage widened, and I saw the thing Priya had promised in hints. A decommissioned streetcar platform, its curve like a parenthesis protecting a secret. Posters from a long-ago art event peeled at the corners, images of trains and faces and color Christo would have smiled at. A chain-link gate stood open. Beyond it, a newer door had been set into old concrete, matte black. A small keypad with a stainless shroud to shield prying eyes. "We're going to walk from here," Priya said. "The grade is too sharp for the car without a spotter, and we don't want to be loud, and we don't want to lose this car." I locked the Lincoln with my fob, and it flashed its little blink that says, "I am an obedient machine." The sound was too cheerful for the room. I told myself I'd see it again. We moved as a unit, me front with a flashlight at low angle, Priya a half step behind me, JJ between us, the senator bringing up the rear with his folder tight and that left hand tucked. I thought of all the times I'd led wedding parties through hotel kitchens and how confidence can be a kind of disguise. We looked like we belonged to the hallway until the hallway decided we didn't. Halfway to the door, we heard the footsteps. There were 2, maybe 3, slow, dragging, not the purposeful clack of hard soles. Not a shuffle either, something in between. I killed my light and mouthed, "Back," and we stopped. In the dark, the whole world was hearing. Far off to our right, through a bricked arch that looked like a secret someone didn't keep, something like a person moved and then paused, then moved again. The pauses weren't the rhythm of thinking, they were the rhythm of forgetting. JJ made a sound under the mask, a breath caught wrong. Priya put a steadying hand on his shoulder. The senator stood very still. Stillness is a kind of consent. You let the hallway propose what happens next. I picked up an old metal sign that had fallen against the wall, "No exit," in letters so big they make you obey them, and pitched it down the corridor into the shadows. It clattered and skidded and finally clanged into a pole. The footsteps turned toward the sound. The pauses changed. The corridor turned its head. We moved. The door's keypad glowed a polite green. Priya's fingers danced, as if remembering a piano piece learned too young, and the lock clicked the kind of click that says old metal giving way. The door opened into a short vestibule and another door. Interior digital numbers glowed in a warmer color, like an appliance left running in a quiet house. JJ hesitated on the threshold. He swallowed. "The light is loud." "Mask stays on," Priya said gently. "You're doing well." "Do not condescend to me," he said, with the last little edge of a hill kid who had a chance to be someone. Then his shoulders softened. "Please, sorry, I don't feel wrong. I just feel like I'm a half second behind the world." The senator took a slow breath. "We are all half a second behind the world today, son," he said. Behind us, the footsteps found the metal sign and lost interest in us for one more moment. We went through the second door. The bunker wasn't a Cold War imagination of concrete and bunk beds. It was smarter, smaller, and more tailored. It had another vestibule where boots could be left, and a bleach mat for shoes, and a bank of lockers along one wall holding Tyvek coveralls and N95S and nitro gloves sized for people who'd never worn them before. It had a battery-supplied LED strip in the ceiling and a manual ventilator larger than I'd expected for the size. The main room had a heavy oak table and 3 chairs that didn't match, a kitchenette with a gravity-fed water filter, and a steel rack with a portable generator at the bottom, like a dog waiting under a dinner table. Against one wall sat a radio console, a black box with a fan hum and a control head I recognized from catalogs, Motorola APX for local, an HF set that could talk to someone past the horizon if you knew what you were doing. "This is not a government facility," the senator said, which was about the last thing you need to say out loud in a room that declares it by existing. "It is the equivalent of a storm cellar, built with private money, maintained by a select few." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. He looked surprised for a fraction too long. "I want you to be our driver," he said. And then the surprise turned into understanding. "No. You want me to tell you whether I intend to keep you in this room while I go further." "I do not. I cannot. The door behind that panel, He nodded to a second keypad. Leads to a corridor that runs under the old Navy Hill. It connects to a service artery near State. I am going to speak to a friend who has the keys to a space no one thinks about until they do. If we can reach it, we can wait. We can call out. We can be in the quiet and not be a problem anyone needs to solve. Priya watched him with the kind of loyalty that gives you permission to be honest. "Sir," she said, "JJ needs to be stable first, and you need to sit and let me redress your hand." He looked as if he hadn't heard that last sentence. Then he looked at his hand like it belonged to someone whose name he couldn't retrieve. "Yes," he said. We sat him at the oak table. I set down my bag and made a pile. Gauze, tape, chlorhexidine, a little tube of antibiotic I kept for a different kind of day. He put his hand on the table, palm up. The cut was straight, like a razor's work on cheap paper. It wasn't deep, but something about the skin around it looked irritated, hot. I cleaned it quietly. He flinched once and didn't apologize. I taped a clean square on. He flexed his thumb. He looked at the radio as if it were a person in the room we hadn't introduced him to yet. "We're hearing things," he said to the radio. "We're hearing that some people can be persuaded to calm down if you back away and give them light. We're also hearing that some do not respond to light or to calm, and they do not get tired like they should. And we're hearing that those who are touched by them behave in ways that are of a piece." He swallowed nothing. "I am telling you this as a man who still believes in saying the quiet thing out loud once so your people don't spend all day trying to guess whether you'll say it." It wasn't a speech. He didn't have air for speeches. It was a line he'd been rehearsing quietly between the back seat and the door. We kept JJ near the door to the lockers, where the light didn't glare. He sat on the bench and I showed him how to slow breathe with a hand on the diaphragm. The trick an EMT showed me after a bad car wreck years ago. He copied me earnestly, his eyes on my hand like the hand was a metronome. Priya turned on the radio, set it to scan. The APX stopped at a familiar itch of voice. MPD dispatch in plain language, halting, a beat between sentences as if the operator were writing longhand. Words like hold and assist took turns with words like contain and advise shelter in place. We didn't hear attack. We didn't hear terror. It was as if the language decided it could be responsible for only so many syllables at once. I tried 7. Call 50 on the HF set. Out of habit, out of the old belief that someone on the skywaves would answer late night. The squelch sighed, and then I got a voice from the Virginia side. A ham who sounded like he was in his garage with the door up. He told me what he'd seen. People on a footbridge over 4 Mile Run who had stopped looking at the water and begun to look at the people all at once, like birds turn. He said he'd stayed in the garage. His wife had turned off the lights and lit a candle for no reason she could say out loud. We let the bunker breathe around us for 5 minutes. 10. The footsteps came and went beyond the door, moving along the platform like sleepwalkers passing a window. JJ dozed involuntarily upright, his head bumping the cinder block with a soft apology. Priya handed me a coffee designed to taste like cardboard and comfort. The senator set his phone on the table and touched it with 2 fingers, as if that were enough to do the job of powers he'd enjoyed minutes before. There was no service down there. His position didn't change that. After the bones of calm set, he stood. "This is the part where you decide if you are my driver," he said. "Because where I need to go is not for you. Your job, today, might be to close this door and keep JJ breathing and report what you can on a channel that makes sense." He waited. He understood that waiting is how you treat a person if you want their dignity to do something for both of you. "I'm your driver," I said. "And I'm also not an idiot. If you tell me you're about to walk into a service corridor alone, I'm not going to let you. The last time someone with a title walked a corridor alone in this town, It took a commission and a monument to finish the walk for him. He smiled once, like the ground had reminded him its job was to hold you up. 2 people then, me and you, Priya. I stay, she said. With JJ. With the radio, if the door opens without your voice, I will be gone by the time it reaches the hinge. She said it without a tremor. Miles, mask. She handed me one and another to the senator, who looked at it like a man asked to put a seatbelt on in a car he didn't own. He slid it on anyway. He was not foolish, he was stubborn, and those are cousins who don't talk to each other. The corridor beyond the second keypad was narrower, lit by newer fixtures that had the color temperature of an operating room. The concrete had been poured more recently. The walls had utility runs in neat, labeled trunking. It felt less like a forgotten thing and more like an idea made of polymer and contract. We went single file, me ahead, the senator a step behind. Twice we passed side doors that could have been storage or simply the idea of storage, flat, gray, unmarked. The corridor turned once, and then again, and then it opened, very abruptly, into a space that made the senator stop. It was not a room. It was a wing, the kind of subgrade space you only get when someone buys what they're not supposed to build and builds it anyway. It didn't deserve the word bunker. It deserved facility. But it was half asleep. Lights at a third. Air whispering a little. The generator's heartbeat quiet in a corner like a dog's slow breathing. On the far wall, another door sat, and beyond it, if the senator was to be believed, the rest of his private plan. He walked to the door and placed his palm against a little reader. It beeped, the lazy beep of old friends. The lock did not open. His eyes flicked once to the reader and back to the door, as if the beep was lying about what the room could do for him. He pressed again. The beep repeated its cheerful denial. He looked at me. It was not a plea. It was a question about what kind of man I was when something needed to move. "Try your code," I said. He tried. The reader accepted it with a little green wisp of light. The lock stayed stubborn. He tried another and another. He lost an inch of his posture with each. Then he put both hands on the doorframe and simply stood there with his head near the steel, as if the metal could tell him where the problem was. "People," he said quietly. "This is what I mean about people. You can build a perfect door and a perfect plan, and then someone moves a chair." Behind us, the corridor hummed, a sound that has no opinion. My skin prickled in that subconscious way that tells you something in the air is changing. The senator lifted his head, as if he'd felt it too. And then, like it had known the cue for years, a small voice spoke from a speaker near the door. Senator Harlan. His body changed. It softened into relief and braced for combat in the same moment. "Rita," he said, "you're in there." "I am," the voice said. It was a woman's, compact and not in the habit of being loud. "I need you to open the door." "No." The senator blinked once, slow, as if the sentence had taken longer to arrive in his head than it should have. "We have an intern who may need medical attention. We have a driver who has given more than he's paid for, and we have me. We need to be in there." "You need to be somewhere," the voice said. "But not here, not today." The tiny speaker made a click that might have been a sigh in a human throat. "Do you know what you asked me to build for you years ago? A closet that looked like a room. You asked me to build a thing that would hug you and 2 or 3 of your choosing and let you wait for news. You did not ask me to build a hallway. You did not ask me to build a shelter for a city, and you did not ask me to open the door to anyone but the codes you gave me in a list with no names attached. You mistake me for a selfish man," he said, and the sentence saddened me. Not because of the words, but because of the gap between his belief and hers. "You mistake me for someone who has never watched a hallway fill up with people who thought they were the one," she said. He lifted his gauze-wrapped hand. "Rita, look." He put his palm against the little camera above the reader. The light there winked. "I am not asking for a favor as a title," he said. "I am asking as a person who is out of rope." There was a long quiet. The corridor hummed. I held the flashlight beam low, at the floor, like a campfire you don't want to kick over accidentally. "You were in a meeting," Rita's voice said finally. "You were in a meeting where they said the words that ought to be said. And you walked out of that meeting and did not walk toward the place you were supposed to walk to with the rest of your colleagues." "If I had," he said, "we would be speaking to each other through a fence in Virginia that I do not own." "Perhaps," she said evenly, "or perhaps you would be dead in traffic on the 14th Street Bridge. You rolled dice either way. I cannot be your table." "I'm asking you to let me bring one person in," he said. "Me. Not my driver, not the kid. Me." He turned to me. I saw then, in the terrible clarity that bad light offers, the sweat standing at his hairline. I saw the pulse at his temple. I saw the way his left hand flexed at the wrist like a piano student warming up fingers. I saw the gauze, not soaking, not gruesome, just there, like a reminder pinned to a board. "No," I said gently, "that's not what we're doing." He stared like I'd smacked him with a newspaper. Then the stare softened, because truth has edges that cut you in the shape of the thing you love. "Sir," I said, "you walked into my car with a cut and a story. You've held yourself together with tape and will. You are not going to be in there alone. If you go in with me. Or you stay here with us and we figure it out together. I won't stand in the hallway and listen to you behind a door." "Your wife will object to your heroism," Rita said dryly through the speaker. "I am not married," I said. "Then your mother," she said. "She lives in Boston," I said. "She will tell me to do what I think is right because then she can be angry only at me and not the world." The senator put both hands flat against the door. If it had been living, it would have felt like being pleaded with. "Rita," he said, "if not me, then tell me how to make the room work out here. Tell me how to turn the air. Tell me how to plug the radio flush into something that won't trip a breaker at the wrong time. Give me a mercy that looks like a manual, if not a key." Silence again, the kind that lasts just long enough to make you think the person has walked away. Then I heard the little scratch of a human hand on a paper surface that the microphone had picked up inadvertently. "See the panel to your left," she said. "There's a breaker labeled AUX. Flip it. Plug the radio into the orange duplex. It's on battery-backed isolated ground. Keep the generator off unless you need the microwave. It will drown out the low things you need to hear, and if the hallway smells like oranges, run." "Oranges?" I said. "Coolant," she said, "the wrong kind." Another pause. "And if your intern says the light is too loud again, listen to him." The light above the reader stayed the same color. The door stayed locked. The senator swallowed a thick, reluctant chunk of air, then let his hands fall from the frame like surrender in a play acted for a school audience. He turned to me, gave me a half nod that meant little and everything, and we went back down the corridor to the bunker that wasn't ours. We found Priya kneeling in front of JJ, holding his wrists, counting his pulse out loud in a slow, steady voice. 16, she said, looking up. Better. He almost went away for a minute, but I talked him out of it. Good, I said. I wanted to hug her for no reason we had time for. The senator washed his hands in the tiny sink, long and methodical, like he had suddenly remembered the choreography of a thing that had meant so much for so long. He didn't look at the gauze. He dried his hands and then sat heavily in the chair like a man who had built it and finally trusted it to hold him. We did the panel and the breaker and the orange outlet. The APX purred and then sang, and we heard a USCP supervisor on a patch channel tell a unit to hold their line between Rayburn and the CVC. We heard a park police unit at the Lincoln say the word crowd, like he was rolling a heavy thing down a ramp alone. We heard the word copy more than any other word. "Tell me what you know," I said to the radio. It didn't answer. Radios never do that quickly. Instead, the world sent the messenger it prefers. Footsteps. These were different. Faster, deliberate, not careless. The kind of cadence you hear from people who know what a corridor is for. The light under the door shifted from nothing to sliver as something interrupted it. Priya had the lock bar in her hand before the door handle thought about moving. We all held a collective breath, the room becoming a lung. A voice from the other side modulated low to avoid exciting whatever else might be listening in the bigger silence. Capitol Police. Knocking. We looked at each other, our faces doing silent arithmetic. I stepped to the door and said, "Talk to me," and the voice did. "Officer Kincaid, we're walking the platform. We're looking for unregistered doors. I have 2 with me. I will not open your door unless you tell me something I can verify, and even then I might not." "Fair," I said. 3 inside. 1 is a senator who should not be where the world can see him today. 1 is an intern who is learning to breathe. 1 is a driver who's not as calm as he sounds. Silence, then a half laugh. "Which senator?" I looked at him, and he nodded a fraction. A man who knows how the ladder works, even down here where there are no cameras. "Harlan," I said. "Of course," she said, as if that single 2-syllable noise could contain a lifetime of committees. "I need you to know that above your head there are 30 people who think the best solution to their day is to pull at a door that is not on their floor. They do not have your patience. We are showing them the art posters. It is working for now." "You're not alone," I said to her, which was a ridiculous thing to say to anyone in a uniform who walks a hallway, but it made me feel like a person to say it. "I know," she said, and what she meant was, "I have a radio like you do, and we are all hearing the same choir. Do not open. If we move a crowd to the circle, you will hear a change in the echo. It will thicken. If you hear that, you switch to whisper. Things that are looking will forget your air if you are not proud." Proud landed in my head like a lesson an old scoutmaster would have taught. Don't make yourself big, don't be a flag in wind. "Copy," I said. She moved away, steps careful, moving others with her. The light under the door shifted back to nothing. We waited. The waiting, again, was most of the work. An hour passed like a rope with knots you run through your hand one by one. I made notes on a pad because writing turns chaos into symbols, and symbols can be counted. Priya patched the radio into a second antenna they'd tucked in the locker. Perhaps the room's builders had known a day like this could arrive. We heard the George Washington University Hospital cut its lobby lights to half and lock doors, and a nurse on a handheld talk a colleague through a crash cart that didn't want to roll straight. A half-dozen times, the bunker's air changed a fraction. Small enough you'd ignore it if you had a TV on. We watched the HVAC gauge like a barometer. The senator's phone buzzed once and then again, and then declared it had no service and would stop offering hope for an hour. He took off his mask, set it on the table, and then, like he had to relearn the lesson he had taught his kids when they were small, put it back on without being asked. Then, JJ said very clearly, "It smells like oranges." The world went quiet in our room and loud in my head. Rita's voice, which I'd never heard above a speaker before, lived in my memory. Oranges, coolant, the wrong kind. I walked to the door, put my face near the seam, and inhaled. Under the bunker's cleaned air, there was an acrid sweetness, like someone had peeled a clementine too close to a hot car. The senator looked at the HVAC gauge, then at me. I walked to the panel, flipped the AUX breaker off, and then flipped it on. The whisper of the ventilator changed timbre in that tiny gradation only mechanics and worrywarts notice. The smell thinned. JJ closed his eyes and let his head thump back against the cinder block again. The act of a boy who has decided his skull is trustworthy. Rita saved us without opening the door. "Thank you," I said aloud to no one in the room, and the senator nodded like he'd heard the same ghost. We stayed, we listened. We drank water because people forget to in rooms like this. Priya pretended to read a binder and hid the fact that she was doing math on the back cover. How much fuel, how many hours on battery, how many masks in a box. She is the kind of person cities survive because of. The senator removed his jacket, folded it, placed it on the back of his chair like the littlest office ritual in a place where ritual might keep you human. He talked quietly to me about his first staff job when he learned that tunnels exist and nobody tells you the map until you belong to the building that holds them. He left out the names. He left out who had done him favors and who had not. He said "we" a lot, and I understood why people vote. When we finally moved again, the world above had not improved, and the world below had not forgotten we were there. Officer Kincaid returned twice more to the door, not to ask for anything but to tell us where she was. She was the kind of cop who understands that information is the same as food. The second time, she left us a gift wedged beneath the door. A little foam baton tip, the kind they use on 40 mm less lethal, because if the door needed to be kept closed in a way that could not be explained gently, the tip would tell the story. I slid it into my bag with a respect I reserve for tools that are too easily misunderstood. By evening, it must have been evening, the bunker's wall clock had given up when the power blipped and the tiny second hand ticked in a little circle like a nervous dog. The senator's skin had taken on the waxy look of a man learning a second language he didn't want to learn. He sat with his elbows on the table and his face in his hands, and when he lifted his head the gauze caught and pulled. There was no horror to it. There was only biology and time and a quiet that got sharper. He looked at the radio, and he looked at me, and he looked at the small door that would never open for him. "Miles," he said, "if I ask you to do something that will make your mother angry, will you do it?" "If it is right," I said, "because I am my mother's son." "Do not let me have the last word," he said. "If I talk too much, if I talk like a person who is sure he's the only one who should be speaking, you will interrupt me with reportable facts. Speak like an officer on a busy channel. Say what needs saying and no more." He pressed his thumb and forefinger to his eyes like a man battling glare. "And if I stand up and walk toward that door because I am remembering the way to something that will not let me in, you will remind me that I trusted you to keep me from doing the dumb thing that looks brave." I nodded. People never ask for the right favors at the right time and the right words. They ask the hard ones right when you have enough humility to say yes. And then, because the world has a sense of rhythm that doesn't ask our permission, the radio found a pocket of clarity. A park police helicopter called out a grid square over the Memorial Bridge where people had stopped moving north and started, to use the pilot's careful phrase, migrating toward light. MPD asked for the bridges to be held, then asked again. Someone on an interop channel said National Guard, like it was a suggestion. Someone else said, "We're not there yet." You learn a thing about a city when it hums like that. You learn that it is not a machine, it is a choir with no conductor. Each voice listens, sings, waits, and sings again. By night, when we decided that the reasonable plan was to act like there would be a morning, I unrolled the emergency blankets and we made a map. Senator on the chair, his back against the table so his body would know which way was forward if his mind forgot. JJ on the bench with his mask around his neck, sleeping like a tide rolling in and out. Priya on the floor with her back to the lockers, a binder for a pillow. Me near the door, because the habit of sleeping in a place where you can stand quickly is a thing I have not grown out of. The light dimmed to the color of distant windows. The radio went to a whispering scan, and we fell into that awkward, jerking sleep that visits people who did nothing wrong and will pay anyway. I woke twice to the sound of my name when no one had spoken it. Then I woke to the senator saying words that had nothing to do with policy and everything to do with his daughter's first piano recital. He said the name of the piece, The Entertainer, and he laughed once, short, because of course it was. He said the train from Providence had been late, and he had driven like a young fool, and the only reason he'd made it was that he knew where the lights didn't hold you long. He had learned the city in a different way before it learned it had a use for him. He was fevered. It was polite enough to speak in stories at first. Then the stories began to repeat. He would reach for the folder not on the table and find the mask there instead, and he would put it back on his face like ritual kept him kind. When morning, whatever morning was, came, we had a plan. We were going to trade rooms. We were going to move from the little bunker into a different kind of small. A maintenance closet at the far end of the old platform, where the smell of old tile would cover the smell of us. The plan was terrible. The plan was the kind you make when you have to buy yourself an hour at the price of 20 minutes. But we had to move because the air outside shifted again and the oranges came back, and I did not intend to bet against the woman behind the door twice. We readied. We checked JJ's pulse, which had settled into a human rhythm. We tied a spare piece of Tyvek to the bench leg so we could find our way back in dark. We told Officer Kincaid on a low whisper we were moving one door down. She told us the circle above had calmed and that the art posters had begun to peel in the humidity, which would give people something to do with their hands. I wanted to send her coffee through the seam of the door, and an apology for every time I'd stood at a traffic light and wished a siren would push me through it. We opened the bunker door. The corridor met us with breath like a living thing. I shone the flashlight at the floor and we moved, tight, like a small unit that had learned the choreo by mistake. Out on the old platform there were fewer sounds than I'd feared. One set of dragging steps, far off. A whisper of air finding a register. The ghost of streetcars past. Halfway across the platform, a girl's voice said, "Help!" and the word bent around the tile and came at us from 3 directions at once. We stopped, our bodies making a wall without speaking. The senator closed his eyes briefly and then opened them, as if he had asked a power for fireworks and received a candle. "Hello," I said, aiming the light at the floor. "Where are you?" "Here," the voice said, from the mouth of a corridor that had been bricked and reopened at least once. I tilted the light a little and saw a sneaker, a small one, the kind kids draw stars on. Behind the sneaker, a leg. Behind the leg, the rest of a person could be, or not. Priya squeezed my arm hard enough to be a sentence. "If she moves like she's guided by a magnet," she whispered. We stepped back and closed the door and lived to be ashamed about it later. "We won't be ashamed," the senator said. It wasn't a boast, it was a choice. "Come to the edge," I said to the voice. Slowly. Hands where I can see them. There was a shift, and then the owner of the sneaker appeared. A teenager, 19 maybe, hair tied back in the way you do when the world needs you to see clearly. She held her hands up as if she'd learned the gesture from TV. Her face was too pale under the flashlight's shy wing, but her eyes tracked, and when the light hit her she didn't flinch as if it burned. She squinted like a person being polite about brightness. "It's loud," she said, and the word meant air and light and everything else that makes a city. "What's your name?" Priya asked. "Amaya," she said. I got turned around under the circle. I followed voices, and the voices became not voices. They were breath. "Do you have any injuries?" I asked. She shook her head too fast. "Just tired." "You alone?" the senator asked. "All the way I am," she said, which is the kind of answer that's either poetry or data, depending on how you hear it. I heard both. We brought her to us. It was the kind of rescue you can do without a press release. We opened the maintenance closet, which turned out to be a space with a mop sink, 2 broken brooms, and a poster about hand washing in a font that assumed you were already angry. We closed the door gently and breathed the mops like perfume. And, no surprise, there were more after that, because one found person leads to another. Officer Kincaid brought us 2 more, a janitor who'd taken a break in the wrong place at the wrong time and decided not to open his break room door until the water in his bottle was gone, and a diplomatic driver who had taken a wrong left off Virginia Avenue at exactly the wrong moment and ended up in a dock that refused to become an exit. He was a mirror held up to me, and we traded brittle jokes like men who can't help but compare notes about tail numbers and traffic lights programmed to humiliate you. By noon, if noon existed, we had 6 humans in the closet and 1 locked bunker that had become a neighbor and 1 locked door that had become a line someone had drawn and not crossed. We had a radio that carried more voices than any of us had planned for and a plan to move at dusk, if dusk would help us, toward Foggy Bottom Metro, and a gate that sometimes, on days that don't make the news, is left unguarded for contractors to use when they don't want to walk the long way. The diplomatic driver swore he knew the gate. The janitor had a ring of keys that looked like a saxophone player's lanyard and would make a small god weep. The senator, who had sat and stood and sat again without ever talking like he was in charge, looked at me, and then at the radio, and then at the door that wouldn't open, and then at JJ. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder, lightly, the way you touch a sleeping child to tell them it's time to leave a house that is not on fire yet, but could be. He said, "After today, I will be a different man in rooms. I will not say the word preparedness like something you request on an appropriations line. I will say it like something you carry. I will say it like a bag you make sure is where you can reach it when your hands are doing other things." He paused. "If I get to say anything at all." "You will," Priya said, and the sentence was both blessing and contract. He closed his eyes once, like a man tasting the first sip of coffee he's allowed himself all day, and then he opened them and said, "Miles, you will drive again. Not today, but again." He was right, and he was wrong. I did drive that night, but not in the Lincoln, which I left under a conserve of concrete and promise, like a beetle gleaming under a leaf. I drove a maintenance cart with a battery that declared itself a philosopher on hills, and I steered it like a priest carries a chalice. And I did not hit anything that did not ask to be hit. I took the senator to the gate with the janitor and the other driver and Amaya and JJ and Priya, and we got it open with a key that should not have worked and did, and the night air over the metro tracks felt like a confession. The Foggy Bottom platform was quiet in that way big rooms are when they are upset. A few lights on, a few bench advertisements pretending there is a tomorrow. A couple of people in uniforms who looked at us and decided not to see us because they had run out of seeing for the day. We slid down the stairs and stood near the tile that remembered trains. We were not the only ones who had decided the platform would be a kind of church until something else made sense. Officer Kincaid walked us to the turnstiles like we were a family she was giving directions to in a city they had no business entering and every right to inhabit. She did not ask for a fare card. She asked for our names. I gave mine, and the others gave theirs, and the senator gave his without his title. She wrote them down in a notebook that looked like a high school spiral, and she tore out the page and gave it to me. "Why?" I asked. So when you say your names later," she said, "you will know you said them once right." We waited. We listened to the old rail sing in the way metal does when it remembers being busy. Then we moved. Not all the way to Virginia, not all the way to safety, not even across the river that had carried so many plans. We moved one stop, one in a train that had no driver and all of us as passengers, toward a platform where a nurse was waiting with a bag of IVs and a little rolling cart, and a smile that tried to mean all things. The city breathed around us. Somewhere above, a door finally opened, and someone walked into a room where radios are quiet because walls are thick. The senator did not stumble until we were on the escalator. It was a small stumble, the kind you cover with a joke if you are not a senator, and especially if you are. He covered it with silence, and then with a sentence to JJ about how walking escalators are an insult to men who think too much about stairs. JJ laughed like he'd been asked to. And me. I drove a maintenance cart back through corridors people had named and forgotten, and I parked it by a mop sink, and I went back to the room with the bunk of a table and the radio and the orange outlet, and I sat in the chair the senator had loved for an hour and hated for a day, and I did the work that keeps a city alive when it does not know whether it loves itself. I listened, I wrote, I whispered. I did not open any doors that did not open for me. By morning, real morning this time, the kind that gives you a sliver of sun under a door like a kiss you didn't earn, the city had begun to speak in the voice of a person who knows there were mistakes and also meals to make. The checkpoints on Constitution had names now. The bridge closures had reasons that were not rumors anymore. The words on the radio had acquired verbs that were not only hold, assist, contain. They had deliver, coordinate, reopen. We moved again and again in increments. We did not conquer anything. We did not win. We circled around what we could not fix and put our shoulders to the part that had a hinge. We brought 3 more into the room and sent 2 more out. The senator's voice over a different radio later that day sounded measured and a little further away than it had under the circle, which is how you sound when a microphone is calibrated and your blood has decided you are allowed to be the person you said you would be. And the car, the Lincoln, sat in the underbelly of K Street, bold as a lie and as stubborn as a promise. When I returned for it 2 days later with Priya and the other driver, it started on the first turn like it was a creature that had decided to keep trusting us. I wiped the trunk clean of someone else's day and put my go bag back where it belonged and turned the scanner on and listened to the radio learn how to be a neighbor again. I was a limo driver for a U.S. senator the day the virus hit Washington. I drove him and I didn't. I opened doors and I didn't. I learned that you can know every cross street in a city and still discover a map you have never seen, the kind that's built of people and rooms and the quiet between them. And I learned that the most important thing you can drive is not a black Lincoln with a quiet cabin, but a corridor of normal inside of which people can remember what they're for. If you ask me what I did that day, I will say, I didn't honk, I didn't perch, I kept my windows up. I listened for oranges. I drove small and rested big and told the truth when it would hold a door open. I didn't have the last word. That belongs to the city, and the city is still speaking. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.